Could have killed them all. I could have killed you. In town, you're the law. Out here, it's me. Don't push it. Don't push it. I'll give you a war you wouldn't believe. Let it go. Let it go. I'm Liam, this is Rob, and welcome to the Hey You Guys podcast. This week we revisit the introduction of what is now considered perhaps the quintessential 80s screen hero in his initial outing in what might conversely be the most 70s movies of the 80s. A movie as much about PTSD and the personal and political impact of war that many didn't support as it is explosions and stunts. Although despite its relatively low-key scale, is still a movie that isn't short of spectacle. Rob, this is probably my favorite Rambo movie. It's Sly Stallone's favorite Rambo movie. Is it your favorite Rambo movie?
It actually is, even though it's not a Rambo movie as you would think, is it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's be fair. Look at, what are we on now? 7 or 8? What are we on? 5?
Five. We don't count 5, but yes, 5, sadly.
We barely count 4. But
I'll count 4. We'll get to this in Legacy. We'll count 4, not count 5.
Where Rambo kills all of Burma. But we'll get to that one. But, I mean, this is so small in scale compared to the other ones, but it is really good. The thing about this film is how it narrates the future very well. The fact that cops are always assholes, even now. My God, cops are pricks.
Cops are pricks, and Dennehy's a fantastic asshole in this. A very complex asshole. That's a weird sentence. In many respects, this film's actually a bit of a two-hander, the way it was actually edited in the end. It was initially much more of a Rambo film, a 3-hour-long Rambo film initially, but turned out into a 90-minute movie where the emphasis was put a lot more on the other characters. And go for it.
So basically, you said it was Sly Stallone's favourite Rambo film.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't to start with. He hated the cut. So the 3-hour cut, he hated it. So so he then asked, right, can we just have less of me and more of the story from the other characters?
Well, that was the thing, and it's one of the things Sly does very well in his movies. I mean, it's a big part of Rocky's character, is the fact that they're kind of, to an extent, relatable, but certainly you can kind of get on his side, despite the fact that, you know, he does some pretty monstrous things in this movie. But if you take the book by David Morrell, which was released in 1972, I think, and the initial cut of this film, it leans a lot more into the idea that, you know, America have ostensibly created this monster, and he can't live in this world. You know, it made me think of the operative from Serenity. The only difference being, of course, that Chiwetel Ejiofor's character in that film knew that he didn't belong in society. He actually goes out of his way to say it. Yeah. But in this film, he's trying to fit back in society, but he's too much of an animal, and there's nothing potentially to relate to. And of course, Sly's watching this film, and he's just like, I'm just this savage going about kind of killing people. And at the end of the film, he dies in the initial cut because the idea is that he had to die because he just can't live in this America.
They kill each other, don't they? The sheriff, they kill each other. The narrative of the book as well, you kind of feel it in Brian Dennehy's character, but you don't. It's never actually explained. But the reason why he's a dick to start with to Rambo, because they don't actually give him a name in the book. He's just Rambo. They give him John for the film.
John J. Rambo.
John J. Rambo. Yeah,
it's like Homer S. Simpson. You know.
Sorry, the reason why he's a dick in the book is because the sheriff is actually a veteran of the Korean War, which they, I guess, downgraded to calling it a police action, and nobody actually cared about that. And then
it was kind of like
and then Rambo comes back. It's the Vietnam War. Everyone is either thank you for your service or, you know, you're a baby killer and all this shit. So the sheriff feels a bit unwanted and unloved against,
which is strange, isn't it? Because the whole point of like Rambo's character is that he also feels unloved. Like, I guess he's more arguing on his side of the fence. It's like they've forgotten the war, whereas on Rambo's side, it's like everyone remembers the war because, you know, theoretically in this instance this just happened. Again, we'll get to the fact that this is an 80s movie, but really it's a 70s movie. And you get this kind of clash, of this generational clash. And like you said, it's not mentioned in the film. It's basically cut out. The only nod you get to it is in his office. You see his medals, and they're actually very high level. It's like a Purple Heart or something or another. So, you know, he's a war hero in his own right, but it's something that's kind of cut out of the script to kind of make this a leaner movie. And, you know, by accident or by design, this ostensibly created the 90-minute action movie. Because again, you know, this was supposed to be a 3-hour-long epic. And it was Sly Stallone who went in. It's like, no, we need to cut this right back, pare it right back. And by doing so, he has created the 80s 90-minute action movie. I mean, when we were like talking about watching yesterday, my wife wife and I. There you go. You know, wife bingo right there.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, how long is it on for? And I was like, fucking class, 93 minutes. I'm so happy to see a 93-minute movie just over the goddamn moon.
Yeah.
But that's ostensibly what he's creating. It's one of the interesting things, and sorry, I'll be stepping on the facts a bit here, but when you hear like some of the names that were initially touted to play John Rambo before Sylvester Stallone, because he was very low down the list, and a lot of people turned it down before he did. And you're talking Nick Nolte, Al Pacino, Robert Redford, Robert De Niro, and you're like, Robert De Niro was Rambo. That sounds mental. It's like, no, Robert De Niro in Rambo 3 sounds mental, but Robert De Niro in this version of Rambo makes perfect sense. This isn't a million miles away from Deer Hunter, the 3-hour cut of this movie. It's so far removed from Rambo 2 and Rambo 3. It's almost unbelievable. In the same way,
that's the point, because this follows the novel to a point, but there are no novels because he dies. So they do what they want for the other films, and let's be honest, they do what they want for the other films. But do you know why Al Pacino turned this down?
No,
because they wouldn't make Rambo crazier.
which is the complete opposite of what Sly wanted.
Yeah.
He wanted a more relatable character, and it's something that his performance, which I think is totally underrated in this movie, brings to the film. You know, whereas you think about what Rambo would have been if he had been even crazier as Al Pacino and died at the end. It's like, well, that would have been the end of Rambo. It would have been a strange movie, kind of like straddling decades, and that would have been it.
Think about what Al Pacino wanted, though. He wanted Tony Montana as a Vietnam vet. That's what he wanted.
Yeah, pretty much. He would have done the accents. He would have done the whole thing, wouldn't he?
Going on about Sly, right? I'm so glad they can't. Well, the version I watched was recorded off TV a while back last year because I knew we'd cover it at some point. So I recorded it off TV. And there's a big difference the version I watched and the version I saw a few years ago, which is, I'm going on a bit of a...
That's okay, go for it.
Highway here. But David Caruso actually in the tent towards the end of the film, before they blow Rambo up, actually admits that Galt, who deserved to die.
Oh, yeah, Galt's the real villain of this film. He just happens to die like 20 minutes in.
David Caruso admits to the sheriff and to the colonel that Galt went a bit
cuckoo. Yeah.
And that's why. And then the sheriff is still like, well, it doesn't give him the right to do what he's doing now. But they cut that out of the film that I watched, the version that I watched.
Really?
Yeah, from the TV. But also, I don't know if did they have more flashbacks? I only had 2 flashbacks in.
No, I think they're only very limited flashbacks, and it's very front-ended.
And I am quite glad they cut the flashbacks a little bit because it suited well. But I couldn't do any more of Sylvester Stallone's Fu Manchu mustache.
Yeah, that handlebar mustache I'd absolutely forgotten about. And I was like, wow, they swung for the fences with that. I bet you they had loads more on the cutting room floor, and they suddenly look back, it's like, dude, look at that fucking mustache. We can't be having that mustache.
It's pencil thin. It literally looks like somebody drew it on with an eyebrow marker or something. Do you know what I mean? It's pencil thin. It's good look.
It's brilliantly distracting because those scenes are disturbing. You know, he's being tortured and he really sells it. But all I'm looking at is that goddamn pencil, kind of handlebar mustache. Go, really? That's what you went with? But apparently that was the choice. But it was interesting you brought that up when the soldier comes in and delivers that whole message about the fact that some of the guys were like pretty hard on him. Yeah. Because at that point, I'm like, why isn't David Caruso doing that as Mitch? Because I feel like there's surely a cut of this film.
Sorry, David Caruso did do that.
I thought it was the guy who had his nose broken, who very really actually had... The actor actually had his nose broken by Sly Stallone.
Maybe it was him, was it?
Yeah,
because I can't remember, because I remember watching it and they admitted it a while.
Oh, yeah, and it was cut and stuff.
Yeah, because didn't have that, so...
I see. But yeah, because I think it was Wilkie, because, he famously pops up a few times in the film afterwards, because you notice him because his nose is broken, and it was very, in real life, broken by Sylvester Stallone, by accident, in the scene when he's escaping I was going to say the prison, the precinct, whatever, the sheriff's department. I feel like there's another word for it. The jailhouse? What the fuck?
It's just the sheriff's office, isn't it?
We'll just go with the sheriff's office. That's fine. And I think it's the bit when he elbows him in the face when he's on the floor. But I just feel like there's another cut of this movie where David Caruso doesn't just disappear. Because in the opening, like what 20, 30 minutes of this film, it feels like he's the voice of reason. Like there's a scale. There's what's his name? Galt, who's clearly out of his fucking mind. There's Brian Dennehy as Sheriff Teasel, who is kind of like constantly back and forth, and we'll get to him because his performance in this is absolutely fantastic. And then the complete other end of the spectrum, the guy going like, guys, what the fuck are we doing? It's David Caruso as Mitch. Yeah. But then after he gets his like real telling off by Brian Dennehy, you know, when he grabs his hair and he's like, look at him, fucking look at him and stuff, he just kind of disappears from the movie. And it's an odd one because at the start of the film, it really feels like it's setting up for him to be like the third part of this kind of like range of police officers to show that, well, you know, you can get real psychos. You got the sheriff who's kind of caught between two worlds, and then you've got what is ostensibly the nice guy on the force. Yeah. And then it's just like, we've had enough of the nice guys. Let's just cut him completely.
I think you're viewing the sheriff a little differently to how I view him, Mike, because he's an asshole. Complete asshole. He straight away judges Rambo walking through town. You know, he acts like a dick towards him. I don't care who you are. You're the sheriff. You know exactly what Galt is like.
Oh yeah, but he does mention in his defense, one of the things they got out of their way to mention is the fact that I was like, I've known him since you were, a scab on your dad's ass or whatever. Like he doesn't say that. I don't even know why I use that as an example. But I think they're going out of their way to say, listen, this guy has been my friend my entire life, and you know what it's like. Everyone's got one. That friend who's a complete asshole, but you've known him since you were a kid, and it's like, well, he's my fucking asshole.
I've known him since I was a kid, but you're a police officer.
I know, but it's a small town as well.
Do police brutality. Oh, let's get to this small town. Actually, 2 points, right? First point, I haven't I haven't flown in a helicopter, but I can't imagine somebody who speaks as softly as Galt is able to relay to the pilot when it's that loud, that low down in a valley, exactly what's going on. You move and I'll kill you, or whatever he says to him. Without those headphones on.
Well, yeah, but you've nothing the look on his face. Like, he's got that asshole face. He's holding a gun. I'm not sure if I need to hear it. If he turns around and he's got that gun, I'm like, he probably wants me to hold the helicopter still. So I'll give him the benefit on that. But it's bizarre. It's bizarre in this film because he's actually the only person who dies in the entire when people think of Rambo, they think of bloodbaths. In this film, he's the only character who dies, and it's an accident, and it's completely in self-defense. Like, he's trying to kill Rambo, and he has numerous opportunities, and eventually in self-defense, all he does is throw a rock just to scare him off, and obviously he ends up falling out of the helicopter.
It's Galt's own fault, though, man, because he takes the seatbelt off.
He does, yeah. Oh, yeah. This is all on him. He's an asshole,
and it's well deserved. And point two, right? You mentioned small town. I will caveat that I haven't actually visited America either, so I'm not too sure, especially small town America. But how many towns look like cities are built on the highway? That didn't look like a small town to me. That looked like just...
Well, it is a small town, and I almost went there in Liam Does Geography again this week, because Hope, Washington, it's bizarre. Hope, Washington is a fictional US town. However, it's both based and shot in Hope, British Columbia, which is just across the border in Canada. And when I went to Vancouver and we did a trip over to the national parks, Banff Jasper, you've basically got two options. You can go directly east, which would have taken me to Hope, or you go slightly north, and that takes you to Whistler, and then you go around. And at the time, it just didn't click. Don't get me wrong, I don't regret my choice, because Whistler and that route is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it doesn't matter where you're driving in that part of the world. It's absolutely gorgeous. But I'm pretty sure that if it clicked to me that the first stop after Vancouver, if I'd gone directly east, would have been Hope from fucking First Blood, I would have 100% gone there at the cost of all other locations. So when I saw it, I was like, Hope. I was like, why is that ringing a bell? And I was like, as soon as I'm watching the film, I was like, that's not America. That looks like Canada. Yeah. And then not only was it Canada, but it's somewhere in Canada I could have and really should have gone to.
I can't imagine the town feels like it's built either side of the highway. It's really weird.
It is. I'm convinced it's cut into two bits. Maybe the second part, the end of the film, which feels the most quintessentially Rambo as we know it, feels like a much bigger town. The start very much has that Canadian small town feel, where it's basically just one main road surrounded by mountains, and it's got a few shops and houses either side, and that's it.
It seems really weird. Like, it seemed like he didn't even need a car when he was shooting. He could literally just walk across a highway and visit everyone he needed. It was just an odd look for me. Also, the second thing, right? I'm going to say is I'm going to commission somebody to do a theme tune for Liam Does Geography, because
it pops up every fucking week. I do apologize. But to get to your point about Dennehy, it's like in many, I mentioned the fact that this could have been a two-hander, and maybe why I'm showing you a little bit more sympathy for Dennehy in this film. I mean, if you made this, you could just as easily call this film Dennehy, a Canadian sheriff, which doesn't make much sense, but you know what I mean.
You want to go Teasel Washington Sheriff.
Teasel Washington Sheriff, thank you very much. But if you were to make it that movie and just slightly shift the emphasis towards him, this movie would ostensibly be about toxic masculinity, because that's what it's about in many respects when you watch this film, because things keep needlessly escalating all the way through the film. And at any point, this film could end if they were willing to just take their foot off the gas. But nobody's willing to back down or see sense. It's like, the problem is with Dennehy, he's just too proud. That's his issue. Like, even like Rambo, and I did like the silly intro, it's like the whole let it go. Yeah. By the way, when Beth heard Let It Go, she's like, this basically is a Frozen remake. And I was like, it kind of is. They're up in the hill, outcast, blah, blah, blah. But like Rambo's just saying, just let it fucking go. But he won't let it go. You're talking about two personal wars. There's like Rambo, who doesn't want to admit that he wants a war, but does because he doesn't know how to fit in society. And then you've got Dennehy, who very much does want this war because he is unwilling to back down. Like that moment when Rambo jumps out, puts the knife to his throat and says, like, I could kill you. It's like, it really should be a warning. But instead, Dennehy, once he gets past his tears in this moment, like, oh my God, this has got out of hand. He could have killed me. Then all of a sudden, that pride starts bubbling up again. And you see it all the way through the film, just behind his eyes. Like so many moments, you see him when he's shouting at Colonel Troutman and stuff. He's not really trying to convince Troutman. You can see he's constantly trying to convince himself. Like this whole movie is Brian Dennehy basically trying to justify his actions to himself. And you see, he's just got this temper. Like even when he goes to the bar to see Troutman and basically to apologize, he immediately just blows up and goes on the offensive. And it's kind of, you see it in America all the time. You see it in Trump's America, certainly. But like I said, this whole concept of toxic masculinity runs all the way through the film, because if they were willing to just step aside and just let their pride go, the film would basically, it wouldn't be a very interesting film.
I think you might be looking a bit too much into it.
I think it's all in the performance in the same way.
I honestly think it's just Brian Dennehy trying to rectify a mistake. Like he didn't want this guy coming through town, so he decided to arrest him. His deputies got out of hand, so he doesn't want it being. So he's vilified Rambo to the point where Rambo just has to be shut up, and he keeps saying, "I want him alive," but there's no commitment in that. I want him alive. To the point, I think it is. Don't shoot. You said about escalation, right? To the point where they shot Rambo with a fucking rocket launcher.
I know. It's an interesting point, like you bring, like with the rocket launcher thing, because you're like, well, Rambo's being shot by rocket launchers. This is a ostensibly ridiculous film, but it's like this film actually goes to great lengths to ground the movie wherever possible, to kind of sell you on the idea that this is possible. Like they keep saying, like, no, Rambo is the best in the world. And these guys, even though he's fighting what turns, first it's like, the kind of local police officers who are clearly out of their depth. And then they bring in the National Guard, but they go to such great lengths to make the National Guard like buffoons. Like they keep saying, like, these guys are weekend warriors. They're like, they go in, they've got all their guns, they're shooting at Rambo. As soon as Rambo shoots one round back at him, 90% of them are like, fuck, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up to shoot guns, not to be shot at.
The guy that was leading me on about weekend warriors, he's like, I got to be back at the pharmacy tomorrow.
Exactly. That's not like by accident. Like that's a big part of like saying, yes, we're aware that you've got basically what turns into a whole army chasing Rambo by the midway point of this film. But they're saying it's like these guys they're just not in the same league. They don't belong on the same planet. And one of my favorite parts of this film is the bit when the sheriffs initially go and attack him. It plays into that idea that, they're going into Rambo's playground at that point. It's like they've left the town, now they're in the woods, and now they're on Rambo's turf. And for like 20 minutes, this movie turns into a horror movie, a legit horror movie. And what it actually reminded me of was Predator, of all movies. Any excuse to bring a Predator, of course.
Yeah.
But this idea where he just singles them out and he's just picking them off one by one. I mean, at one point, one of the guys actually says, we're not hunting him, he's hunting us. It all sounds like lines.
That was Mitch.
Yeah, Mitch. And like there's thunder and lightning, they can't see what's happening. All you're hearing is screaming. Like, you know, they totally sell on the idea of how quickly he can disorient these local cops and that they're in no position. Like the first sign of action, and it's just panic. Like when a guy suddenly looks down and he's got spikes in his legs, he's like, I'm a fucking small town sheriff from Hope. I can't deal with this fucking mayhem. And it's just like that idea that, again, this film could have ended then because he could have just killed everyone and left.
Let's talk about small town sheriff, right?
Yeah.
Okay. A small town sheriff's department. Do they really need what looks like 40 men? Before they even bring in the National Guard or the state police, there is a lot of deputies.
There is, but we are talking about the era of, and how many movies we've mentioned this, where a mall will have about 72 mall cops. You know, so if Commando exists in a world where 72 mall cops exist in one fucking local mall, then I think, you know, Hope County, Washington can have, I don't know, 30 local sheriffs, I suppose.
So, I want to talk about, right, one of the most unbelievable things. Like, I can get past Rambo managing to escape from in the depths of the sheriff's office to get out of what we think is 40 sheriffs or 30 sheriff's deputies, managing to escape into the woods, managing to survive that fall with just a sliced arm, managing to throw a rock at a helicopter, everything. I can believe all of that happens. You know what I can't believe happens?
Is this about the mustache again? Or?
No.
Okay.
No, not about the mustache. When, you've already mentioned it, when Teasel, Brian Dennehy, goes to the bar to apologize to the colonel, it takes 30 seconds for them to call the waitress, put their order in, and get their drinks at their table. No fucking bar is that quick.
Especially that bar was busy as fuck as well. Yes. Like, it was one of the things I noticed. Like, that is a busy bar.
I don't care if you are the sheriff and people are trying to keep you happy. It's
Well, see, that was my only caveat. It's like, well, it's the sheriff talking to a kind of 3-star colonel, but I'm like, it's still not happening. It's still not happening. But like it does make for a weird film because I was watching with, you know, I mentioned the fact I was watching my wife again, and you know, I kept telling beforehand, I was like, Rambo's a weird film because it's surprisingly low key, especially compared to other, you know, you think of Rambo 3 was the most expensive movie ever made at the time, and he literally takes on a Russian army alongside his Afghan brothers. You know, 80s were a very different time. But while it is low key comparatively, you mentioned a whole bunch of moments then, like by any other standard, loads happens. This film's got great stunts. The ending is actually relatively bombastic, which we'll get to shortly. And you know, I think one of the stunt drivers broke his back when he did the jump in the police car. You know, some of the stuff with the motorcycle was fantastic. You know, that jump is, you know, someone had to do that. There's no CG. It looks really good. And even just having the helicopter down in the ravine, I was watching, I was like, this is a really impressively constructed scene because they had to get the helicopter down there. And as I'm watching it, it's really bizarre because I'm like, it's low key, but still surprisingly large. And I think what actually grounds it in many respects is the fact that it's set in Hope. You know, if this was set in like the middle of Chicago and it had the same set pieces, you'd be like, oh, you know, because they'd be driving down a busy street. But instead they're driving down a country lane. It doesn't feel as big. And of course, the big point being that comparatively speaking, and I think when I think kind of small scale, what I'm really thinking is grounded again. The fact that despite these stunts, that they are trying to explain that this could happen in the real world. And by Rambo 2, Rambo 2 is only 2 years removed from this. But make no mistake, thematically, it's a decade removed. Like, this was released in 1982, and we talked about it with films like 48 Hours and stuff. That films from like the early 80s still feel like they've got one foot in the 70s. This film has both feet in the 70s. This is a film that should have been made in the 70s because, you know, we've already talked about like the casting option. It was written in the 70s. Everything about it is the 70s. You know, when he comes into town and Brian Dennehy, I'll always just call him Brian Dennehy rather than Sheriff. He says, oh, you know, you walking into town with that flag and that hair and stuff. It's like, you think America now. It's like, well, you walk into town dressed as, you know, a soldier with an American flag. Everyone's like, thank you for your service, sir. And it shows how different a decade it was and where the political mindset was in the 70s, not in 1982, because again, from 1982, where you get this, you know, this concept of the soldiers being vilified, of like, you know, them coming back from Nam and not knowing where to be. And then in 1984, it's like tops off. He's shooting there's no trying to explain why suddenly Rambo can shoot down an entire Vietnamese army. It's very much the apology movie. By 1984, we're talking Reagan-era politics, Reagan-era superheroes on screen. And suddenly you're seeing what America wants to remember Vietnam as, whereas only 2 years earlier, they made the film where it's like, well, this is what Vietnam was actually like for the soldiers. It's absolutely bonkers.
Jesus, dude, take a breath.
I can't, and I want to keep going because sliced alone, I can't think of anyone else, and it's just the timing of his career that he got big in the late 70s, and obviously was massive in the 80s. But nobody does that shift in tone like Sly. You look at the difference between Rocky and Rocky IV. Yeah. We've talked about it before. They come from different planets, and what they really represent are two different decades. Rocky is 70s cinema. Rocky IV is the most 80s cinematic moment possible of all time.
You've said a lot, mine. So when I kind of caveat now, or when I kind of rebuttal what you've said, it's not going to make sense now because we're 10 minutes down the line.
Sorry, dude.
You're right, though. Thematically, this is a 70s film. It should be 70s. I mean, it's him coming home from the war. It's him trying to find his friends. He says one of the best lines I've ever heard in this film, which is, I can't remember the guy's name, the Delmar, I think it was. He's gone looking for Delmar. And he says to Colonel, and Colonel says, no, Delmar's alive. And no, Delmar's dead. Oh, how did he die? The war got him. He just didn't know it yet.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic, if not dark line.
Well, it is, like you say, this film starts dark, it closes. I mean, obviously, Rambo survives in this movie. Yeah. But this movie ends, of course, there's a lot of explosions. But what this movie really ends on is an emotional breakdown. That's what the end of this film is.
Yeah, because
it's not gun shooting.
It is. It is just a man going through PTSD in the most insane way possible. As soon as you push this dude, he is going to snap. It is it's not one of the first things that depicts this, but you've pushed him way too. And he's actually said it so many times. Don't push me. And yes, all right, Rambo was a bit defensive as well, and he's a dick because as he got off the plane, people were calling him baby killer, were chucking shit at him. So he's on the defensive, he's on the back foot straight away. So of course he's going to be that person who goes, well, he says to the sheriff asks him a couple of questions. Now the sheriff's asked him in a dickish way, but he has asked him. And he's like, why are you pushing me? What'd you say? Why are you pushing me? And then it just gets completely out of hand. And yes, Rambo could have just thought, you know what, I'll just walk to the next town. But he's also thought, no, I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted something to eat, so I'm going to come back. I literally have done nothing wrong. You've arrested me for walking. That's basically what you've done. And it's just gone out of hand. And it's mad that 90 minutes, what could have been a 3-hour film, all stemmed from a dude walking. That's literally it. That's all Rambo did was walk. Yeah. And it got completely out of hand because everybody just misjudges everybody else. It's fucking nuts, mate.
It is insane, but you make your point there about like Rambo, like the fact that he could walk away, the fact that he's also a bit dickish, and it's actually kind of said almost outright at the end of the film when he's having that conversation with Troutman, is the fact that, of course, you know, in this film you see Dennehy as the aggressor, as it were, and he is the outward aggressor. And like, you know, I mentioned the whole toxic masculinity thing, the fact that he doesn't want to back down at this point. You know, he doesn't want to be seen to lose. And again, it's that generational thing. It's like the Vietnam guys versus the Korea guys. It's like, I can't go out like a bitch to this Vietnam guy. I can't just have him clean me out of my whole sheriff's department. I don't want to have to explain that, not only to, you know, those in power, but to himself in many respects. But by the end of the film, they really are implying that it wasn't just him. Like Rambo, even though he doesn't admit it, he wants this fight because he doesn't know how to live in the world. Like, you know, the whole idea is like, I had, you know, attack helicopters, I had all my friends, and now I can't fucking get a job washing a fucking car. You know, that breakdown's amazing. Yeah. And they really do sell the idea that he is partly to blame, that he himself could have walked away, but he's just like, if he knew it or not, he wanted that battle because that's the only way he knows how to live at this point.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's no antagonist and there's no protagonist.
There's not. On a surface level, you think, well, Dennehy's the antagonist.
Yeah, on a surface level, Dennehy's the villain and Rambo's the hero. But if you think about it, it's not, because in any other POV, in any other point of view, Dennehy's the sheriff. Dennehy's the one going after the guy in... Dennehy could be the hero. and Rambo could be the villain. It's a.
Well, I think it was probably closer to that in the book. Maybe I haven't read the book, admittedly.
It's a completely juxtaposition. Like, you don't know. It switches. It swings and roundabouts. It's done so well in regards to the fact that everyone is fighting their own inner demons. And basically, if you narrow it down, this is all about your inner demons.
Absolutely. And it's like you said, with lesser actors and a lesser script, this could have been really straightforward. You know, if Dennehy had been a kind of just blatantly evil cop and Rambo had been a savage, and you lost that depth. But instead, you know, like I mentioned with Dennehy, I think he plays it perfectly in this film. Like, he is a dick. You are right. He's undoubtedly a dick. But he spends so much of the film, he's not just blatantly evil. Like, what's his name? Galt.
Galt, yeah.
Galt, yeah. He is just a bad thing. And I think Galt's almost in there to say, listen, by comparison, like, Dennehy's not out of his mind like Galt. He's not like, you know, this villain. He just wants his small little town. And it's just, things get out of hand. And you do have those moments. There's a reason he has that little breakdown with those tears. Like, what the fuck am I doing? This is totally getting out of hand. And part of it is because he knows now he's in all the way. He can't back down. And the same with Rambo. Like, he doesn't actually have many lines up until the end. But you can see that this is a man, like, behind his eyes. Like, you know, he feels unloved, underappreciated, not appreciated, like, totally out of place. He's a guy, excuse me, who's lost all his friends and does now to live into a world he's returned to, a world that he spent like half of his life protecting and now wants nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
And even before that final scene, when this all kind of gets laid out to Troutman, it's like you can already see that behind us. I think Sylvester Stallone in the right role is hugely underappreciated. And I think he's a very good actor. And
absolutely.
You know, I know some people say that final scene is maybe a touch of overacting, but I think it's pitch perfect when he does have that breakdown.
But you see it at the beginning, right? Right at the beginning. When it's nicety. Before he even gets to the sheriff, he's gone looking for Delmar. He finds his wife. He's trying to have a civil conversation. He doesn't know Delmar's dead. Yeah, he thinks Delmar's gone away for a bit.
Yeah.
Doesn't, and he's just, he is still finding it difficult to actually go. And you can see it, like, he's just trying to say nice words. Oh, this is us, this is it. But what he really wants to say is, look, where's my friend? I just want to find, like, he just wants to push it to find his friend. But he has to be nice to this lady to explain to her that he knows Delmar from the past. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can see it. You can see that he's fighting his, again, inner demons to just push forward and just, like, be, because everyone was a dick to him. I mean, word of the day for this podcast is dick. Everyone was a dick to him, and he is just defensive, and he's going to be a dick to them. But
well, that was one of the things we mentioned earlier. Oh, sorry.
I say he's just trying to be nice to people who don't know him, but he's still fighting that thing to just push.
Yeah, and again, this comes back to the whole Sly Stallone thing. Like, in his performance, and obviously in his, you know, how he wanted this film to be made and how it was cut, is that the important word that is, like, sympathetic. Yeah. Like, the whole point, the reason this film works, I think, is the fact that Rambo, despite the fact that, you know, he is a guy having a mental breakdown, despite the fact that, you know, he is attacking cops and stuff, that he is sympathetic. And, you know, you think about what this film would have been if you had had a character, like you say Al Pacino. I'm sure it would have been a good movie in its own right. But if you'd had this completely unsympathetic character, I just don't think it would have worked. And it certainly wouldn't have led to, you know, the subsequent sequels, which I think the sympathy is always there, that sympathetic edge to Rambo, and a big part of that is Sylvester Stallone. Like, it's something that's very true of Rocky, which is, it's almost amazing, you know, when we talk about these things. Like, is there any other actor who has two parts as iconic as Rocky and Rambo? Like, I don't think there's anyone. Like, the only one I can think of is Harrison Ford with Han Solo and Indiana Jones. But even Arnold Schwarzenegger, obviously he had the Terminator. I don't think he had another character anywhere near as iconic as Rocky and Rambo. Like, you know, to have two sagas that kind of lasted over, what, 30, 40 years, that the fact that they just keep going, it's unbelievable that, you know, usually you're lucky if you've got one iconic character, obviously, but to have two, it's absolutely, well, almost unheard of outside of Harrison Ford, of course, who's obviously got maybe the most iconic, you know, kind of couple of characters in movie history. But that is the crossover between both Rocky and Rambo, is the fact that they're both sympathetic. And I think that is what makes the movie work. And that's what makes that breakdown at the end of the film. And it is interesting, as you come in towards the end of the film, before the very emotional breakdown, is when it actually becomes the most recognizably Rambo. Because in the woods, you know, we mentioned the fact that it turns into a horror movie for a bit. But it's only the end when suddenly he's got the gun belt.
How fortuitous is it to land on the truck that has an M60
just knocking around?
Yeah, they're not even knocking around. They had it mounted and they were ready to just shoot out of the truck. Like, of all the trucks he could have landed on, it was that one.
Again, despite the fact we talked about like how grounded this movie, you are getting the introduction of those 80s of staple 80s action cinema. Like, when I think of like the extreme version of this, it's when Arnie goes into what looks like a sports store in like small town America and comes out with like 7 rocket launchers. You're like, what the fuck? Like, what kind of store is this?
Like fucking landmines and shit as well, radio detonators.
It's like he's just walked into like the middle of a military kind of platoon and just taken all their weaponry. But no, he just went into like the equivalent of JD Sports and was like, oh yeah, well, we've got a special on rocket launchers. Buy 3, get the 4th free. Yeah. It's like, what the fuck?
I love it, right? Because these National Guardsmen, right? The one works for a chemist. The one dude, like, his glasses, he's a little bit portly. He's just doing it to be with his friends on the weekend. Like, is that real in America, that the National Guard, who do get called into war if they have to, I do appreciate that. Do they have access to rocket launchers? Do they have access to M60 machine guns?
The grenade launcher or the rocket launcher, wherever it is, does seem a little bit much. I'm not sure. I mean, don't get me wrong, we are talking about America here where anyone can get their hands on an assault rifle, let alone the National Guard. So if Joe down the street can get his hand on an M16, why can't a guy who, kind of works forces, the National Guard, whatever you want to call it, can get his hands on a rocket launcher? So maybe, in terms of just pure escalation, it makes sense. The dude who
shot the rocket launcher reminded me so much of Billy from Beverly Hills Cop 2. Pull here. Extend here.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, like, it is bizarre that he ends up with the M16, of course, and he's got, like I said, the gun. Well, we call it a gun belt, but it is more of a gun sash, isn't it? If it goes over the shoulder, I suppose. But you even get, like, it's the first truly iconic Rambo moment. It's a really low key because he's like in an alleyway in Hope, and you just see his shadow. And it's the first moment you get what I would consider the classic Rambo silhouette, where he's holding this giant machine gun. And I think at that moment, without seeing Rambo, anyone could see that silhouette and be like, that's Rambo. And I feel like it's only in like the last moments of this movie when our concept of that 80s traditional concept of Rambo is finally born, when he's got the bullets, he's got the giant gun. He doesn't do the whole shooting the gun in the air and just go, kind of, like he doesn't do. I couldn't remember if he did it, because there's one bit when Brian Dennehy's on the roof of the sheriff's department and he's just shooting the shit out of everything. I was like, does he shoot the gun in the air and go, I think he doesn't, which is a bit of a disappointment.
All right, Nick Frost.
I know. But even in that moment, when you're like, all right, that's when the movie really escalates in terms of scale, because suddenly everything's getting blown up. But in that moment, despite the town getting blown to smithereens, what it actually turns into is that one-on-one confrontation. Yeah. Suddenly, everybody else disappears. The National Guard disappears. The other soldiers gone.
Until right at the end, they're gone. Like, they're having a cup of coffee down this diner that's 30 miles away that the sheriff wanted him to go to in the first place. I mean, they're just nowhere to be seen.
Nowhere to be seen. And again, thematically, I like it, because it really should be that showdown, because the core of this movie is that clash of generational kind of, views, or whatever you want to call it. It really is, despite the army, despite all the other cops, really this is Dennehy versus Rambo in many respects. Yeah. And I like the fact that at the end of the film, it is just mano a mano, despite the fact that Rambo sees fit to blow up the entire town for no particular reason. That's when the movie, Rambo really starts to exist as Rambo. Although, you do get the headband earlier in the film, but I don't think it really works in this film.
No, it's not really.
Unless it's not the red really headband.
The headband tie-in scene from number 2, is it? Let's be fair.
No, and even Bethan said when we were watching this, she goes, I didn't like the headbands. I said, why not? She goes, it didn't look cool and it didn't serve a purpose. Like, I'm not convinced it served a purpose in Rambo 2 or 3, but one thing it did was look badass. Like, if you've got that kind of gearing up scene when he's got the knife and the music, and he's got the gun, and then he ties the headband, you're like, oh, it's time to kick some ass. It's totally badass.
You're doing all that kitting up, right? As you just said, where he's putting all the guns in and stuff, and then he thinks, oh, what I'm going to do now is cut blood flow off to my brain, because he ties that thing
super tight.
heights.
Yeah, he really does. Especially I'm imagining it in Rambo 3. Like he really goes. I love Rambo 3. We'll get to that in Legacy, though. Jesus Christ.
We might want to move on as it goes as well because we're under a time crunch because one of us, you, have to leave.
It is. Although I just want to mention that breakdown at the end of the film, and we have got to it a few times, but. And the fact that some people have referred to it as being overacting, I just think it is a man finally able to just talk. And some of the stuff I love, and of course, you know, he tells that horrible story about his friend. It's like, you know, it's like, Johnny, I want to go home. It's like, I can't find your fucking legs. It was horrible stuff. It was like, my friend's fucking all over me. But like that interaction with Troutman, when he finally just bursts into tears, and it's just a great moment of awkward masculinity. Like Troutman, like he obviously loves this kid. You know, and he's trained him and stuff, but he doesn't know how to act around him as a human being. And you can see it, like, literally, Rambo grabs him and drags him down. Like, he's like, he's saying stuff like, I just don't have anyone to talk to. Like, just low-key shit like that. It's like, I had friends, I don't know, like, what to do. I have no one to talk to, and I got this thing going on in my head. And he drags Troutman down to just give him a hug, because he just wants that human contact. And Troutman is like, he finds it so awkward. And you can see, like, he wants to be supportive, but he doesn't know how to act as a human being.
But that's it, because to Troutman, though, Rambo and the rest of the platoon were tools. He trained them to be a tool.
Yeah.
They were tools at the end. And then, obviously, because it was that thing, I tried to find you at Arlington, and then he's making excuses. It was a clear excuse. It's not Arlington, whatever it is. Let's say Arlington. It might be Fort Bragg. I tried finding you there. I went there to find you. He said, but you weren't there. And it's like, I was somewhere else. They've got me sitting at a desk, blah, blah. It's a clear excuse. It's like he cut ties with them as soon as he got home because they outlived their usefulness.
See,
they were good there.
There was a clash there.
He comes back, and it's more pride for him. Look, I trained this. Look, you see it in his eyes. I trained this guy. This guy is decimating your small town cops, your state police, your National Guard. I train. He's proud. He's like, oh yeah, this guy. I know exactly. Like this guy's going to show up 5 years down the line. He's going to kill all your men. Blah blah blah. 2 weeks, you'll find him in a car wash. It's because he's proud and he wants. And Brian Denny, he says it right. You just want to make sure your machine hasn't blown a gasket.
Yeah.
Absolutely spot on. He's not treating Rambo as a human being, even to the point at the end of that breakdown. He doesn't know how to treat him as a human being. He's a tool that he used. He doesn't know how to actually just treat him as a human being. And I think
I agree with everything you're saying, but I think there is like a clash there in terms of how, especially in that moment, like you just like the camera kind of zooms up on Troutman and you can see like he just has like this wobble. So it's like almost like he's a product of the system as much as Rambo is. And like you say, I think he totally uses him as a weapon. He's outlived his, but I think he genuinely does care about Rambo, but in his own unique way. But it's caught up in the whole military system. And as I said, in that one moment, he suddenly realizes that this kid's having this breakdown. And he almost wants to have that human connection with him, but it's like the most horrendously awkward hug. He's like, I want to help, but I don't know how to. I only know how to live in this military world. I only know how to help you. And Troutman, I have no doubt, would jump on a grenade for Rambo, like out in the field in that kind of like Brothers of War thing. Yeah. But in terms of a guy who just wants a hug, he's like, oh, I don't know how to do this. It's so awkward. But to leave on a more positive, sorry, mate.
I can only think of one awkward hug that would be worse. It's when you go in for a handshake and somebody else comes in for a hug, and now your hand is between bodies, like just
especially if you accidentally get just a stroke of dick in it as well. It's like,
it's stuff, and you're the barrier between two penises. It's just,
dude, like I'm not gonna lie, I feel like my head clears eventually, but in like that split second, like you're like, I'm gonna have to go and kill myself now. Like I feel that strongly about it. I feel that strongly if I fuck with a handshake. If someone goes in for like I have this big thing about getting handshakes right, and if I go in and I end up just like like you accidentally grab just the end of their fingers, like wow, shaking I'm gonna have to move to Alaska. I can't see this fucking person again. Jesus Christ. But on a more positive note, the fact that they kept Rambo alive at the end of the film was totally worth it, not only for the sequels, but for that classic freeze frame. I love the fact that 80s movies had that freeze frame thing at the end of the film, where it's just his face, look at me, I'm the star of this fucking movie. And just for like 20 minutes, the credits roll in. There's no kind of like, there's an extra credit scene. No, it's just 20 minutes of Sly's face. But it is what it is. God bless 80s cinema, right?
You've got to earn your money back, haven't you? You've paid to have Sly. You've got to earn your money back.
Absolutely. But yeah, you are right. We will move on. So over to the love and hate section. In terms of love, 1, Stallone, and 2, Dennehy. I think they're both legitimately fantastic in this film. I think they're fundamentally what make it. 3, like tone and scale. The fact that this feels so different to the other Rambo films, I think it's actually all the better for it. And I'm going to sneak in a 4th one, of course, the fact that they kept Rambo alive. I love the fact that they kept Rambo alive because it meant we got to have all those other movies despite the inconsistent quality.
My loves are a little bit different. I love the fact he's able to find an M16 just randomly. I mean,
that's much better. That's much better than mine.
I love how after when he's escaping the sheriff's office at the beginning, there is a woman at the back, if you notice it, carrying out her duties like nothing's happened. Like he's sprinted up, he's beat shit out of everybody. He's done some weird jiu-jitsu slide on the floor, and there's a woman just carrying out her duties at the back, just filing.
Just being chill. She's just like, this isn't my job. I'm here to make the tea, and I'm going to make the goddamn tea regardless.
That woman was told to just act like a secretary. She acted like a secretary, and nothing was going to break her.
Imagine you're getting your ass whooped, and she's just over there, still at the counter, like fucking hell. Barbara is ice cold, man. She didn't give a fuck.
Yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely love the fact Galt died. My God, what a
bad
prick, mate.
He is horrendous. Although you mentioned the sheriff's office, and the fact that you noticed this kind of background character just kind of going about a business despite the fact that there's a war going on right in front of her. One of the other things I never noticed before is Rambo's a Christmas movie. If you notice, there's a cut of the sheriff's office, there's a wreath above his door, there's a fucking Christmas tree, and I'm like, wait a minute, is Rambo a Christmas movie? I think it might be. Admittedly, it doesn't lean into it. It doesn't end with a Christmas song and a Die Hard. But it is a movie that, if nothing else, happens apparently at Christmas.
If you wanted to cement it, he needed to steal the bike off Santa Claus, didn't he?
He did. It's a shame. I think Christmas is used more in this movie to sell you on the idea that it's cold. That's about it. But it's a bit of a shame that they didn't lean a little bit more heavy on the idea that Rambo was a Christmas movie. But hey ho, what can you do?
What do you hate?
Hates. You've got. I'm assuming we're both having him on the list. Galt. I mean, I love to hate. Although it is a love to hate, but Jack Starrett as Galt is outrageously evil. It would have been a very different movie if he had stayed alive, and I was glad that he died, not only because he was a wrong-un, but I feel like the emphasis had to move on to Brian Dennehy's character. And again, I think it worked thematically because it actually softened Brian Dennehy's character by comparison. Like you say, he's a dick. Word of the week this week. Brian Dennehy is a dick, but Galt is a monster, and that's the difference.
Yeah.
The fact that the series ended with Rambo 5. I've gone back.
Well, you hate First Blood because it had Rambo 5.
Yeah, well, it's just the fact that it ended on it. It's like there's something about the 5th movies and series, and we've talked about this is one of my favorite movies of the 80s, and it's a movie that every time I go back to, I think I like a little bit more. And you think of Die Hard, obviously being one of the best of the series. Die Hard 5 is so bad. It's like, it's unbelievable that it's cut from the same cloth as Die Hard. And it's the same with this. Like, First Blood is such a fantastically nuanced movie. And that mess of a movie, Rambo First, the fact that it's called Last Blood as well, which really connects it to this film, makes me a little bit sad because I was genuinely looking forward to that film.
If you honestly think that's the last Rambo movie, mind you,
I really think it is. I hope
it is.
It's a weird one because on one part of me, I'm like, just call it a day. But on the other side, it's kind of like the whole Crystal Skull thing. You're like, I don't want them to end on a don't get me wrong, Crystal Skull is a much better movie than Rambo 5. But the other part of me is like, I don't want them to end on Rambo 5. But I'll be amazed if he makes another one. But never say never. I'm sure they said the same thing after Rambo 3.
I love the fact you're struggling to find hate, so you've said your hate is a legacy thing. Right, come on.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other one is the David Crusoe thing. The fact that Mitch just got cut halfway through the film. Yeah. He just completely disappears in the second half of the film. And it feels like from kind of, outside of Rambo, if you kind of, the sheriff's department represent the real world, as it were. He was very much the heart of the real world, and he just gets completely cut. So it's a bit of a shame, but obviously from a narrative perspective, it's all about putting that emphasis back on Brian Dennehy for the second half. So I can understand it, but it was a bit of a shame that he just disappeared. But yes, as you can guess, I am struggling to find things I did like about this film.
I hated Galt straight away. I agree. Yep. I hated the way Dennehy treated Sly.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely hated that. I thought that was terrible. It was just it didn't need to happen. I know it needs to happen to set up the film. It's just oh my god, just have a conversation with another human being. And I know it's easy to say, but it's just. Oh.
But was it right? Don't get me wrong. Again, Brian Dennehy is a fault. But in the car, again, it keeps going out of its way to explain his position, to kind of humanize him to an extent. Like he's gone about it the completely wrong way. But he even says in the car, it's like, listen, if I let you through, suddenly there's going to be a whole bunch of drifters coming through. And he just wants, he doesn't want trouble with Rambo. He wants the opposite. He doesn't go about it in the right way. But he's just like, I want you out of my town because I like my nice, boring little town in Canada, apparently. And it's only when they bring him back, it's not actually Dennehy who gets out of hand. It's the other. It's Galton, the other guys. They're the guys who like.
But no,
beat the
he
shit
arrests
out
him
of
for no reason. Though he arrests him for no reason. He arrests him for walking. And if you don't want people walking through your town, don't build your fucking town on the side of a highway, a main through road. See, I'm sorry, he is wrong here. It's a fucking through road. There's people traveling. Fuck you need to connect A to B. You've got to go through this road where your fucking sheriff's office is on the fucking side of that road. You don't want people walking through? Don't build your fucking town on that road.
Look, dude, I agree with you. I'm not saying Dennehy's not a complete bellend. But again, I just like he's just going about it the wrong way. He's like, it's like, and again, it comes back to that whole attack on pride thing and the fact that he can't let it go. Like, he drives him out of town because he doesn't want drifters in his town. And when he says, oh, I just want to eat here, and he's just said, listen, just keep going, we got no problems. When he turns round and he walks back into town, like you say, he is walking, but what Dennehy is seeing is a guy who's not listening to him, who's basically attacking his authority in this town, which he doesn't like. And so he arrests him. Again, we need that because there's no movie without it.
Exactly.
I'm just making the argument that I think Dennehy is a more complex character. I don't think he's just a dick.
And I'm making the argument that they're going on about this freaking town that's built on a through, even to the point when Dennehy drives him out of town. I do it in air quotes. He doesn't make any turns. You never see him turn left, turn right. He drives straight. Dude,
that's not honestly though. That is not the fault of like if you're taking the very real town of Hope, British Columbia. The reason that they're all built along a single road is because either side of these roads are just mountains. It's not like in America where you've got like loads of land behind. Right? There's nowhere else to build, so they just have this road.
But the real town of Hope, British Columbia, as you keep bringing up, probably lets vagrants through and are happy to
it's Canada, of course they do. They would invite you into their houses. Anyway, they would have waffles and fucking what is it? The chips and poutine. Yeah. Watch hockey, all that. Type shit.
I struggled with a third, so I'm just going to skip.
Oh, fair enough. Well, we'll move on to facts. I think we've already mentioned a few, and I'm sure you'll have a lot more. I've just got a few written down, but it's just the fact that like it's not quite Edge of Tomorrow in terms of naming conventions, but it's not far. Like when people think of this film, they think of Rambo 1. This film was initially called just First Blood, based on the book, which is just called First Blood. Then in Europe, because the film blew up, despite having quite middling reviews, which I find surprising because I think it's a fantastic film, it was then changed to Rambo First Blood in Europe. But in Europe, where Rambo maybe it's like kind of, you know, a Spanish film becoming very popular internationally and then getting released over here and being called like Juanjo or something. It just wouldn't make any sense. You'd have to change the title. So in a lot of Spanish-speaking countries, it's actually called Acorralado, I'll say. But anyway, it means surrounded, which actually makes sense in many respects. But the point being that this film has had so many bloody titles. But I think most people now think of it as being Rambo First Blood. But it isn't. It's just First Blood. In terms of other ones, we've mentioned the casting. They even had, I think at one point, Kirk Douglas was supposed to play Troutman's character. But we've had the whole dying thing, but the fact that it played horribly to test screenings, the fact that obviously Sly himself hated it. But yeah, we mentioned the other films, you know, in the series, and one of the points that Sylvester Stallone brought up specifically is when he looks back at this film, he thinks it's a perfect film. And comparatively, the second film is a vanity project, both for him and for the US. You know, we mentioned earlier the fact that, you know, it's how Americans wanted to see the war, how they wanted to see their representation on an international level. So you've got this bizarre movie just 2 years later where it's a total vanity project for both Sylvester Stallone and for America. It's absolutely bonkers. But
so I got a few. So the canvas that he wears, that he makes a coat out of, was actually found in the woods where they were filming.
Brilliant. So
they used it. That's fine. And to this day, Stallone still owns it.
Which
like
is
get it home, you know, he's preserved it because it was like a piece of rotten canvas, so it's kind of like preserved now. But he still has this canvas. I wonder if he puts it on every now and then and just parades around his house as Rambo.
Well, that's the thing, though. Nobody thinks of Rambo as the canvas look, do they? You know, it's again, you know, we keep coming back to how different these movies are. But in the second and third films, it feels like everything is so perfectly designed. Like, you know, all his gear fits perfectly. He's got the headband. It's all about the look. In the first film, he's wearing stuff they legitimately found off the ground. That is not happening in Rambo 3, I can assure you of that.
So during the filming, a truck which was used to store 50-odd firearms imported into Canada was stolen along with all the contents.
Yikes.
Somebody just stole 50 guns.
I wonder if they knew it or whether they just stole a truck and they suddenly get it back home and they're like, dude, there's like fucking 50 assault rifles in the back of this truck. Jesus Christ.
You're on about selling internationally, right?
Mm-hmm.
After showing buyers 40-minute edit of the film, the international rights sold in 5 minutes. So they only saw 40 minutes of what this film could be. And in 5 minutes, they were like, no, we'll have that. We'll sell that in the...
Yeah, I mean, you could literally just do it from like Dennehy chasing him up into the mountains, him taking out all the local cops, and then the soldiers showing up. 40-minute stretch. It's all solid gold. Get this on the big screen.
David Morrell, the author of the original novel, stated that he prefers this film over his novel, which is... Well, again, we talked about like the different tones, the fact that this film is so much more sympathetic. Although David Morrell, and this is kind of leaning into the legacy bit, he basically just, you know, he hated Rambo 5 as much as I did. You know, he said like, this isn't Rambo anymore. Not as much as you, as much as most of the world.
Yeah, I'll give him that fair play.
This is the only film, if you noticed, where he doesn't use a bow and arrow.
Yeah. Again, it became like his iconic weapon outside of his knife, obviously.
Yeah. And we go back to, and this is again one of the very. It cements our point that we've said a few times, where when you think of an iconic character that's been in a list of movies, one of their trademarks is not in the first one. Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy with the Detroit Lions jacket.
Weekend at Bernie's, Bernie dancing, bow and arrow for
Which is weird you bring that up. Like, this was made by...
the guy who directed Weekend at Bernie's,
Yeah, Ted Kotcheff. Like, his list of movies he's directed is actually relatively small, and most of them, you're like, you know, there's not many big hits in there. But randomly, Weekend at Bernie's and Rambo First Blood are his two biggest movies of all the films. Bizarre.
You said Kirk Douglas was meant to be Troutman. He actually was Troutman. He quit the film one day before filming commenced. One day before filming commenced,
That's why supposedly, what's his name, Richard Crenna, was still getting lines fed to him in like the early scenes because he hadn't had time to learn the script because he was brought in so late. And he's fantastic for the most part, but there are a few lines in this film when he delivers it and you're like, that feels kind of awkward. And it's probably because it was being fed into his ear and he had no idea what he was supposed to be saying.
Right. I appreciate we need to move on, so I'll only do one more. I thought this was quite interesting. James Garner turned down the lead role of Rambo because he's a veteran of the Korean War with 2 Purple Hearts. Garner did not want to play a man who comes home from war and starts fighting cops.
You should have had Brian Dennehy's role, obviously. Should have been the sheriff instead.
Yeah. The guy that comes home from war and starts beating up another guy that comes home from war.
Yeah, maybe you wouldn't be keen on that. In terms of legacy, you know, obviously the most interesting aspect of this is that, you know, he is the quintessential 80s hero, but was very much born out of the 70s. You know, a lot of people have a concept of what Rambo is based on iconography, and it's something you alluded to there. All the iconography of Rambo comes from the second movie. I was even reading an article about like some of the facts, and nearly all the pictures were from Rambo 2 and 3, because Rambo, the first film, beyond, as I mentioned, that brief scene when you see his silhouette in the alleyway, and he does have the headband, but it's like a dirty headband and stuff. The iconography is all established in the second film, but he as a character is very much established in the first one, despite the fact that many aspects of his character are kind of abandoned or swept under the rug by Rambo 3 and 4, although brought back for 4 and 5 arguably.
I find it interesting that you said the most interesting fact was what you just said. The most interesting fact of the legacy is it got a Saturday morning cartoon called Rambo: The Force of Freedom, where Rambo, we've seen the films, is now a Saturday morning cartoon show. Whereas, let me read you the synopsis. I love this. On Colonel Troutman's request, John Rambo leads a special unit called the Force of Freedom against General Warhawk's paramilitary terrorist organization, Savage, the specialist administrators of vengeance, anarchy, and global extortion all over the globe.
Oh, amazing. I had action figures based on the cartoon, but one of the things, while it is surprising to hear that, Rambo, an ultra-violent, or initially very emotional, the story based around PTSD and, a soldier's return to America, this was commonplace in the 80s. We talk like RoboCop, one of the most ultra-violent movies of the 80s, that had a kids' TV show. Like, they fucking all did. Everything was turned into a cartoon back then.
You wouldn't see that now, and that's why the 80s
absolutely not
best.
Oh, the 80s were dope.
Uncle Phil, James Avery from Prince of Bel-Air, was one of the characters in
the cartoon.
The cartoon, yeah.
Amazing. What a world we once lived in, eh? Absolutely insane. But of course, I guess like the big legacy point is the sequels. Like, the fact that this film did good business. I don't think anyone expected it to become as big a hit as it was. But what it led to, like Rambo 2, and I mentioned it a bunch of times already, the fact that it's only 2 years removed, and that if you go straight from First Blood to First Blood Part 2, which was, I think, co-written by James Cameron, I think. And you just wouldn't believe it's the same character, it's the same series. And like that film's got so much soft lighting for like the love sequence. It's a bizarre, I never liked Rambo First Blood Part 2. I was never a big fan of it. Rambo 3, which just takes it and just keeps pushing it through the roof. Like I said, the most expensive movie of all time back in 1986, 88, whenever it was released. It's a ludicrous film, but it's Rambo to the max. It's Rambo in its most quintessentially 80s.
I can't really remember 3. I remember him just going up against like a lot of Russia in Afghanistan, but I can't really like. Rambo 2 was probably the same as Rocky. I had Rocky 2 and Rambo 2 on VHS. None of the other films, just those ones. So they were the ones I probably watched more than anything else growing up.
I mean, Rambo 2 was a perfect time because that was the year that Rocky really was kind of saving America from communism, from memories of the Vietnam War. Rambo First Blood Part 2 and Rocky 4 came out the same year. Like, how fucking American could you be to release those films in the same year? But Rambo 3 is, I mean, the scale of it is unbelievable. They have the attack helicopters, obviously none of it's CG. I always remember like some of the great Russians, like, you wish to trust me, you wish to test me, good. Like, there's a lot of stuff you can take from that film for really bad.
We might have to cover 2 and 3 moving forward as well.
I really think we should. But you mentioned at the top that you weren't first on Rambo 4. I really like, despite the fact that it's almost ludicrously violent, Rambo 4, and he does indeed destroy an entire Burmese army. It's a weird combination between like the ultra violence, well, actually that one's by far the most violent, but the more violent, Rambo versus an army of 2 and 3. But it also has the emotional edge of the first film. So Rambo 4 ends up as this weird combination of both Rambo First Blood and Rambo 3 almost. It's quite strange.
I remember a couple of things from Rambo 4. Obviously him destroying half a jungle with a daisy cutter.
Yeah.
That was insane. And then managing to cut a guy's leg, managing to cut a guy's anything off with that massive knife he had. That was
pretty. I'm surprised you didn't bring up the fact that he tore a guy's throat out with his bare hands.
I know,
as well.
But we've seen that before, mind. I mean, we've seen
Roadhouse.
Do that in Roadhouse.
Of course. Yeah. Well, the one thing I loved about Rambo 4 in particular is the fact that he's an absolute bear in that film. If you go back and watch that film, because that's the thing with Arnie. He was, he's not the tallest guy, but he was always like really cut. So he always looked quite athletic, I suppose. And then suddenly in Rambo 4, you're like, I would never want to fight him. He just looked ginormous. And it's just such a shame because I know people have fault with Rambo 4, but I like Rambo 4 despite its faults. But Rambo 5, Yeah, it's very much in the Die Hard 5 category of just being something close to an abomination.
Wait. There was a Die Hard 5?
I know. It's unbelievable to like anyway. Like, make no mistake, Rambo 5 is pretty racist. And I was one of these people, because it was like the time it was released was like peak Trump and stuff. I thought the liberals were getting on Rambo's case. They're like, oh, this film's pretty racist against Mexicans. And I was like, oh, they're just going after it because they're kind of, they're showing some Mexicans as bad guys. And then I watched the film, I was like, oh no, this film is racist as fuck. Like, as soon as he gets to Mexico, they don't even drive through like a nice part of Mexico to get to the rough bit. Every Mexican is the worst person in the world. I'm like, come on, guys. You've got to add a bit more depth to this film than that. And you think, again, back to the first film, how deep, how far it goes out of its way to add depth to characters. And then by the fifth film, they're just like, Mexicans are bad guys, Rambo, go and kill them.
It was basically, you've killed Burma, you've killed Vietnam, you've killed
Burma.
You've killed Russia, you've killed, who's left? Do you know what I mean?
You've killed hope.
Yeah.
Quite literally.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Fantastic.
Video games?
Yeah, well, soundtrack very briefly before that. It'll only be quick, but Jerry Goldsmith, who's come up a bunch. I mean, he's done The Omen, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, Planet of the Apes, but he also did. We've covered him before in Poltergeist, Gremlins, Total Recall. But the most interesting aspect of this film is that the main theme is so introspective. Like, you think of. I mentioned, very poorly, when he's doing the gear up scenes in later films, and it's a very aggressive soundtrack. And it kind of keeps rising, and it's this real hero music. And then you go back to the first one, bum, 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 but it's so low key. It actually reminds me of the music from the Incredible Hulk TV show from the 70s.
Yeah,
it's very much like that, and in many ways, this movie has odd similarities. This guy who's got a monster inside him, doesn't know how to control it, just wants to be left alone, but people keep giving him shit. And the monster comes out. And it's like a man dealing with his inner demons, his very literal inner monster in the case of the Hulk. And I just thought, it's interesting that when you look back at this film, it's also low-key, it's also emotional. But I do love, when Dan Hill, I think the song's called "It's a Long Road," and they play it at the end credits. It is borderline South Park levels of 80s music.
All at the end as well.
They really do, and you think he's almost just going to tell the story of the film. In a bit of the film, he got caught in a cave. It's just that kind of Americana bullshit. Yeah. But it's an interesting score all the same. In terms of video games. Yeah, you talk about kind of, thematic dissonance, whatever you want to call it. Rambo, the video game 2013. It's very bad, but basically, remember Die Hard trilogy back in the day for the PlayStation? It was like that, but in 2013 for the Xbox 360 and PS3. And you go through each of the movies, and it's basically an on-rail shooter. And of course, for Rambo 2 and 3, that kind of makes sense. But the game starts with Rambo First Blood, and you're just shooting down sheriffs in Hope County, Washington. And of course, it just doesn't make any sense because the whole film is him trying not to kill anyone. And then the game comes up and you're just shooting everyone down. It's absolutely ridiculous. The Rambo light gun game made by Sega, you may have played it because it's still knocking around local arcades in the UK now, was released in 2008. That's fantastic because it's not based so much on the films. It's just the vague idea of Rambo being a badass fighting everyone. So you just shoot everyone. It totally works. But there was Rambo First Blood Part 2 for the Master System. There was Rambo 3 for the Mega Drive was the one I always wanted because Rambo 3's got that amazing poster. And combined with Sega Mega Drive box art, it just looked dope, despite the fact that the game is so. But it wasn't, unsurprisingly, a First Blood video game. But I'm not sure if you played any of those.
I played the arcade one. That's probably where my Rambo video games career ends.
Yeah. Well, that'll be true of a lot of people. But in terms of if you were going... And I've got two very different ideas here, because if you're going to make legitimately a First Blood video game, and I've used this as an example so many times because of the great work they did for Alien Isolation, but it would be Creative Assembly again, doing a much lower key, Rambo surviving out in the wilderness, you having the option, do you take out the sheriffs or do you just injure them or trap them or whatever kind of thing? That's the company I want. But if we're just doing a more vague Rambo movie, which is a Rambo video game, which is what I prefer, you know, especially if you get Sylvester Stallone back to do the voice and just have a new Rambo story, but, you know, made in the 80s or based in the 80s. I would want Crystal Dynamics to do it. And more specifically, the team who made the Tomb Raider reboot. Because I'm not sure if you remember the first Tomb Raider reboot, but the death scenes were actually mega violent, like quite shocking to see Lara Croft getting her head kind of smashed against rocks and stuff. It was pretty brutal. That would actually work in the world of Rambo. And of course, a big part of that video game is the fact that Lara Croft's bow and arrow is badass. And that's really what you want to see, isn't it? You want to play a video game where Rambo has a bow and arrow. So despite the fact that, you know, there's the concept of what Rambo First Blood, the video game, would be, but really what I want to just see is a big budget Rambo video game.
And to be fair, that's actually spot on with what I was going to say. Well, not the developers or anything, because mine are a little bit different. But when I looked at how I wanted to see a video game, you have to split it twice. You have to have video games that would be about the Rambo character.
Yes.
Or a video game based on the film. So I had two as well. If I was doing a First Blood video game, and I am sorry, but it'd be Naughty Dog. And if you look at like what they did with The Last of Us,
that's a great example. Yeah.
They're creeping through towns, they're creeping through forests, things like that. But they have those big, extravagant chase scenes and things like that. It'd be a Naughty Dog game because it would be, and it'd be fantastic.
That's much better than mine, actually. Like the problem is when I think of Naughty Dog, I usually go straight to Uncharted. Yeah. But the Last of Us as a comparison piece for First Blood is absolutely spot on.
Yeah, especially there's a part of The Last of Us where there's a sniper at the end of a town, and they've got to try and get to that sniper. And then when they get there, then they've got to take over the sniper rifle, and he's got to direct then his friends who are being hunted by these zombies. It feels
it's a great sequence, and you could almost kind of just replace zombies with sheriffs, Ellie with Rambo, and it just totally works.
It feels like it would work. And if I was doing Rambo, kind of like you, because of the bow and arrow dynamic, I didn't really think of Tomb Raider. I think I would go with your one, but I'll stick with what I was going to say. Guerrilla Games did Horizon Zero Dawn.
That was the other one I was thinking of. Yeah. Because the bow and arrow is fantastic in that as well.
Exactly. So obviously Horizon Zero Dawn set in the distant future, all that stuff. But if you strip that out and you had the gameplay of Lara, I think the hero's name was, with the bow and arrow and stuff, again, in forests or in broken down cities or whatever, that feels like a Rambo style thing as well. So I would probably...
Because
we both took games that had female protagonists and said, you know what would make them better? Which unfortunately is not what we meant, but...
No. It is just because it is Rambo. It is more like this, like gameplay-wise, they're a decent match, and the bow and arrow obviously plays a big part. I think the reason I went back to Tomb Raider is because thematically it's a little bit closer.
Tomb Raider is tonally, shout, especially the first Tomb Raider.
The first one. The one set on the island in Japan, which, don't get me wrong, I think the games did get better, but, and I think it's one of those, if I went back to it probably would have aged a bit more because, these games which build upon each other, it's usually quite subtle. It's only when you go back to the original. It's kind of like Call of Duty. Everyone's like, Call of Duty's been the same for fucking 10 years. But if you suddenly go back to a Call of Duty 6 years ago, you notice all those little incremental improvements which have happened over 6 years, and suddenly it feels like dog shit, or at least not as smooth as you wanted to. And I think it'd probably be the same with this. But when that game came out, it felt just like this perfect reboot for the character. I love the tone. I love the setting. The violence I found legitimately shocking at the time, and they toned it down for the subsequent sequels. And I think that's another part. Like that kind of level of violence feels perfectly suited to a
the original Tomb Raiders were perfect for when we grew up, but I believe the better Tomb Raider games are these latest remakes.
100%. Like the character is much better written. They're fundamentally better games. Tonally, I'm more interested in where Lara is now. I don't want to go back to 90s Lara with big boobs and you kind of sticking the butler in the fridge, as much fun as that was.
Trying your hardest because your friend's brother's neighbour's dog walk and you were code to make her be topless.
Yeah, all that nonsense. No. Like Lara is in a much better place now than she was in the 90s.
Should we score and recommend First Blood?
Yes. I mean, for me, unsurprisingly, yes, of course, I'm going to recommend. And maybe more so than any other Rambo film, I will go out of my way, I would say quite aggressively, to tell people to go back and watch this, because I think you've mentioned earlier the idea that when you conflate the movies, and when people think of Rambo, they think of like the iconography from Rambo 2, Rambo 3. Same with Weekend at Bernie's, another one of the director's movies, where the first one's the better one, but when people think of the set pieces, they think of the terrible sequel. Yeah. And with this, I tell people, it's like, no, you really want to go back and watch First Blood. It's a completely different movie and a completely different character. And if you take out the sequels and everything else, it works perfectly as a standalone movie.
Yeah.
It's a brilliantly acted, brilliantly directed. It's 93 minutes, which is fucking dope. Again, absolutely recommend it to everyone. Even if you've seen it, I would say go back and watch it again if you haven't seen it for a while. I'm going to give it 4 stars, but it's a very strong 4 stars. It is borderline a 9 out of 10, sir, if I were to steal your way of going about business. But I am going to stick with 4 stars. But yeah, very, very strong 4.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's a 4-star for me as well, and I would recommend it. It's done really well. There is something that could be improved, but not a lot. Mm-hmm. It's an enjoyable watch again. It brings up a whole host of emotions. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, if you've, as Liam just said, if you've seen it before, go ahead and watch it again. It is a really good watch. It is interesting. And it's a brisk 93 minutes.
It really is. It really, there's no fat on the bones of this movie. There's not a moment wasted. It's all up on screen. It somehow kind of crams a lot of, as you said there, a lot of motion into the film, despite the fact that there's limited dialogue. It's thematically interesting. The action set pieces, which we didn't spend a lot of time on, are actually really good in this film. Yeah. So yeah, it ticks every box. Like I said, it's borderline a 5-star, but I'll just about stick with 4. But ask me next week and it might be a 5 for most. But yeah, that's been Rambo: First Blood or Surrounded, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, next week I suspect it's going to be a shift in tone, isn't it? Sorry, I'm already aware of what the fuck this guy's going to say next, and it's going to be an interesting one. That's
just a little bit of a shift in tone. Well, I mean, we've gone on about it.
You don't, none of this you shit. Don't blame me for what's about to happen. This is on you, buddy.
For a while, right? So I figured, you know what, we're gonna do it. So an alien comes to Earth, teams up with a human to try and contact home, to go against the government. I mean, you know where I'm going with this, don't you?
You know what? A lot of people don't. No, they have no fucking idea where you're going with this.
I mean, a lot of people probably think I'm going to say E.T.
I was thinking of that. What was that one where the aliens, like, they were already on Earth and they worked with other cops?
Alien Nation.
Alien Nation, yeah. For some reason, I was like, this does sound a little bit like Alien Nation.
Alien Nation, right? Before we even say what I'm going to do next week, Alien Nation, sour milk got you drunk in Alien Nation.
Well, I think we should actually end up doing Alien Nation at some point. But anyway, this week is
I love Alien Nation. I really enjoyed. I've only seen it once or twice, but I really enjoyed Alien Nation. But anyway, so an alien comes to Earth, teams up with a human to contact his home planet to try and get home. Whilst all being chased by the government, it is absolutely Howard the Duck.
Yeah, it's not E.T. or Alien Nation. It's Howard the fucking Duck. So yeah, let's be clear. This film is a piece of shit, but it's an utterly unique slice of 80s cinema, directed by George Lucas. So I'm legitimately, despite the fact that I know it's going to be quite rubbish, or maybe even completely rubbish, I'm legitimately looking forward to going back to watch this.
I said to you many times, right? I would rather watch POSs like this, and I don't know why I abbreviated it because we swore a lot.
Yeah, I don't know why. Like, how many F-bombs do we have to fucking drop before you drop shit out of the podcast? But yeah,
I would rather watch pieces of shit like this than watch another trivial Star Wars film that just doesn't change. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Obviously, you're referring to the fact that I still kind of want to go back to watch episode 2, which is a bad film. It's not as bad as Howard the Duck, but I know what you mean. And I've mentioned this to Beth so many times.
Howard the Duck for a while. How about we stop slagging Howard the Duck off until we see it? You might find the sex scene between Marty McFly's mum and a space duck quite erotic this time around.
Maybe I will. I'm going to guess it's still going to be terrible, and I won't. But I do agree with you. I've mentioned this to Bethan so many times. I like an interesting failure. Like in terms of more modern ones, the ones I bring up are John Carter and what was the other one? The Lone Ranger. Those films, they don't quite land, but they're interesting failures. Like, they swung for the fences and they didn't stick the landing. This film is worse than both of those films, make no mistake. But it's an interesting film, and it's almost like when you're watching it, you can't believe it's happening. And I haven't seen this film for well over 25 years, I'm guessing.
The 90s probably was the last time I saw this film.
Yeah, it's a long time.
I think we'll have more fun than this than my last out there choice, which was Super Mario Brothers. I mean, I'm not going to apologize for my choices. I will keep bringing choices like this up. And you will let me one day do Garbage Pail Kids.
Oh, Jesus, got anything to avoid garbage. That is very much, my episode 2, as it were. But no, I that's going to be the interesting point about this film, is that it is a mess of a film. It is a bad film. But the difference with Super Mario Brothers was that I always found that movie quite depressing. I never found Howard the Duck depressing. I just found it interestingly bad. But it's more just... especially when it's made, when there's like quality involved. And obviously the puppeteering was fantastic. It's directed by George Lucas. It's an interesting failure, to say the least. And obviously we'll go into more detail next week. So yes, thank you for joining us for, this is a weird sentence. Thank you for joining us for First Blood. Please. Oh, sorry.
You will leave that film singing the song, by the way.
Yes, you probably will. Or no, either that or just absolutely bemused by the fact that Leah Thompson has sex with an alien duck.
But while you're thinking of that, you're going to be going, Howard the Duck. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Oh, Jesus Christ. Imagine that. Thinking of that sex scene, singing that song. God help you.
Right.
But
anyway,
don't let that put you off. Please do watch Howard the Duck.
Goodbyes.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying, it's a weird sentence to be saying, thank you for joining us for First Blood. Please join us next week for Howard the Duck. Like, I don't think that sentence has ever been said before. But I meant what I said. Thank you for joining us for First Blood. Please join us for Howard the Duck. Have a great week. Oh, and before we forget, here is Rob with all the finer details. Got to get through those, dude.
Yeah, so basically you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. We're also on email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any recommendations, any corrections or omissions we may have missed from any of the films that we've covered. Just get them in. And also, if you could, please leave us some 5-star reviews. That would really help us. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing.
Cheers, Darry.
Thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week.
Cheers. Bye.
Every fucking week. Where's that button? Oh, there it is.